She stood alone at Gate C-23, her hands gently clutching a small bouquet of white lilies. Her posture was calm, her eyes scanning each passenger exit with quiet hope. She wasn't in anyone's way. She wasn't speaking to anyone. She was just waiting, like 1,000 others scattered across the airport that day. But her skin was dark, her dress was plain, and she wasn't carrying a phone to fake urgency. So to one security guard, and then to one patrolling officer, she looked out of place. Officer Brennan noticed her the moment he turned the corner. Mid-40s, broad shoulders, radio always clipped a little too tight to his belt. He walked like someone who expected to be obeyed before he spoke. A call had come in, something about a woman hanging around the gate area for too long. No details, just suspicion. "Ma'am," he said as he approached, loud enough to turn a few heads, "I'm going to need you to step away from the terminal." She turned slowly, confusion in her eyes but no fear. "I'm just waiting for my son's plane," she said politely. Her voice was steady, kind, but too calm for Brennan's taste. He didn't like when people didn't flinch. "And how long have you been standing here?" he asked, arms folding as if preparing for a confrontation. "You have ID on you?" She blinked. "Of course," she said, reaching for her purse. His voice cut in sharper, slowly. Now more heads turned. A child whispered to his mother. Another officer radioed in for backup, and all the while the woman stood still, holding her bag with the same care she had for the flowers. "Is there a reason I'm being questioned?" she asked, softly. That did it. His stance hardened. "You're loitering near a restricted terminal. You fit a description. I'm following protocol." She looked at him, not with challenge, but with deep, tired disbelief. "I'm just here to welcome my son home," she said again. "That's all." He didn't care. He never asked who her son was. And in that moment, the uniform on his chest mattered more to him than the truth in her hands. Before we continue, let us know, have you ever seen someone judged before they even said a word? Drop your city in the comments. And if you believe that dignity should never depend on someone else's assumption, hit like and subscribe. The real story is just beginning. Her name wasn't known to anyone at the gate. Not the flight crew, not the other waiting families, not even Officer Brennan, who had spoken to her like she was nothing, but the people who did know her name. Students, neighbors, retired colleagues. They wouldn't have used words like suspicious. They would have called her the backbone of a forgotten generation. The woman who showed up to parent-teacher nights for kids who weren't even hers. The one who brought dinner to families in grief, or sat with the sick when no one else did. For 32 years, she had taught in the same city school district. No awards, no headlines, just the quiet kind of service that doesn't chase attention, but leaves an imprint long after the halls fall silent. Her home was modest, her routine simpler than most. She didn't post about her kindness. She lived it. This trip to the airport wasn't routine. Her son, her only child, was coming home. Not from vacation, from deployment, months without seeing his face. Nights praying his name wouldn't appear in headlines. She had ironed her dress the night before, bought fresh flowers at sunrise, arrived 2 hours early just to be sure. Not because she didn't know the schedule, but because she didn't want to miss a single second. So, when Brennan approached, when his tone shifted and the questions began, she didn't panic, she didn't raise her voice. She had lived through far worse. Instead, she stood with the kind of stillness that only those who have survived injustice without applause ever truly understand. She wasn't there to cause a scene. She was there to welcome her son home. And if Officer Brennan had paused for even a breath longer, If he'd looked past her skin and her silence, he might have realized. He wasn't confronting a problem. He was stepping into a lesson he'd never forget. Officer Brennan wasn't new to the job. He had patrolled terminals for over a decade, memorized the flight patterns, the cafe schedules, the badge codes for every restricted gate. But with time came habits, and some of those habits ran deeper than training. He claimed to follow protocol, but in truth, Brennan followed instincts, and those instincts didn't just flag threats, they profiled them. He didn't pause to question the report. Suspicious woman near Gate C-23. That's all the radio gave him. And somehow, in a terminal filled with tired parents, suit-wearing execs, and children running between gates, his eyes locked onto the one figure who didn't move. She wasn't pacing. She wasn't loud. She was just still. Too still in his mind. Standing alone, without buying a coffee or checking a screen. That was enough. The moment he approached, his tone was already clipped. Not one of curiosity, but of suspicion draped in authority. He didn't ask, "Is everything all right?" He asked for ID, demanded compliance, and when she didn't stammer, didn't panic, didn't fold, he read that as resistance. He had made decisions like this before. Quiet ones. A man told to empty his bag before being told why. A woman followed through 3 terminals over a misread signal. But none of those moments ever made it past security. There were no cameras, no headlines, just apologies said too late, if at all. But this time, people were watching. He didn't notice the young woman behind the magazine rack, phone angled just enough to capture it all. He didn't see the father gripping his daughter's hand tighter, eyes narrowed as the officer's voice grew sharper. He was too busy proving something, to himself maybe. That presence equals guilt. That silence means defiance. She had done nothing. But that had never mattered before. And so, when she gently asked, "Why am I being questioned?" he didn't hear a request for clarity. He heard challenge. And authority doesn't like to be challenged. He radioed for backup. All she had was a paper ticket, a quiet voice, and a bouquet of lilies that were starting to wilt. But none of that mattered to Brennan, because in his eyes, the sight of a poised black woman standing alone was never just a mother waiting. It was a threat waiting to be handled. What he didn't know, what he couldn't begin to imagine, was that the man she was waiting for had risked his life so people like Brennan could wear a badge in the first place, and he was landing in 9 minutes. Gate C-23 had become a spotlight. What began as a quiet wait turned into a scene, an escalating one. The officer's voice wasn't shouting, but it carried. That trained, commanding tone that didn't need volume to draw a line in the sand. And by now, more than a dozen people had noticed. A few watched from behind phone screens. Others peeked over shoulders. No one intervened, but the discomfort was thick. The woman's purse was now open on the bench. Wallet, keys, a folded paper ticket, and a neatly sealed envelope with the words, "Welcome home, David," written in delicate handwriting. She had pulled her ID slowly, exactly as asked, and extended it without resistance. But Brennan didn't even look at the name. He asked why she was standing there again. Then why she hadn't sat down. Then why she hadn't purchased anything. One question became 5. 5 became 10. And each one sharper, more pointed, more unnecessary. "I'm just waiting," she said again. No change in her tone, no trembling, just the same soft steadiness, like someone who had grown used to navigating suspicion without feeding it. "You've been here too long," he said. This terminal is for active passengers only." She blinked. "I have a boarding pass. I came through security. My son's flight was delayed." But Brennan wasn't listening. He gestured to the second officer now approaching. A woman, younger, hesitant. She glanced at the scene, unsure whether to support or step back. But she nodded anyway. The power dynamics were too far in motion. "I need you to come with us," he said. "We'll sort this out in a holding room." She looked down at her flowers, then up at the clock. His flight was landing. "No," she said quietly. "I'll stay right here." Wrong answer. He stepped forward, taking her wrist, not roughly, not violently, but with the kind of force that didn't ask permission. The flowers fell. The envelope slipped from her fingers and floated to the floor. Gasps rippled through the terminal. A baby began to cry in the background. Someone whispered, "She didn't do anything." A phone camera clicked on with a chime. Another screen tilted forward. And still, she didn't resist. As he began to cuff her, she simply looked at him and said, "You really don't know who you're dealing with." Not loud, not threatening, just certain. It was the first time Officer Brennan hesitated. Something in her eyes unsettled him. But the cuffs clicked anyway, and the moment locked into history. 7 gates over, the plane had begun to unload, and every second was ticking toward a moment neither of them would ever forget. The cuffs weren't tight, but they were loud. That sharp, metallic snap echoed louder than Officer Brennan's voice ever had. Around them, the crowd had swelled, not with confrontation, but with disbelief. People didn't know what she'd done. They only knew how she looked. Calm, quiet, older, and now bound. Her flowers lay face down on the tile floor. One lily had snapped completely in half, its soft white petals curling under someone's careless step. The envelope, crushed. Her purse, still unzipped, was being rifled through by the second officer. "Protocol," she said when a passenger questioned it. "Standard search." But nothing about this moment felt standard. The woman didn't resist, didn't plead. She simply stood there, hands behind her back, eyes fixed on the floor, as if memorizing the details. The tile color, the name of the airline flashing overhead. Maybe it was a way to stay grounded. Maybe it was habit. She had spent a lifetime collecting moments like this. False suspicion. Silent judgment. And now, humiliation delivered under the guise of procedure. Officer Brennan leaned in close, lowering his voice so the crowd couldn't hear. All of this could have been avoided. She didn't respond. He shifted uncomfortably, as if expecting her to argue. He was used to anger, to panic, but her silence unsettled him more than either. And then, everything shifted. Flight 107 had just begun to unload. Down the far end of the terminal, passengers trickled into view, duffel bags over shoulders, earbuds in ears, eyes scanning for family. The clatter of rolling luggage echoed against the high ceilings. And then he stepped through. Sergeant David Carter. Combat boots, dress uniform, high and tight haircut. The ribbons on his chest shimmered faintly in the fluorescent light. He held his bag over one shoulder and a folded American flag in the other, his commanding officers, entrusted to deliver personally. He was smiling at first, the kind of smile that only comes from seeing home again. He looked left, then right, scanned the waiting crowd, but his mother wasn't where she promised she'd be. Then his eyes dropped, and everything changed. He saw the handcuffs, he saw her, and he saw the officer standing beside her, posture straight with performative confidence. David's jaw locked. The flag shifted in his grip. Without a word, he began walking. The crowd noticed. A few people stepped aside. Some whispered. "He's military," one said. Is he going to her?" Officer Brennan didn't notice. Not yet. But in less than 30 seconds, everything he thought he controlled would be turned upside down, and the man he didn't expect to answer for was already closing the distance. Sergeant David Carter moved with quiet force. Not rushed, not aggressive. Just focused, like a man used to walking into tension and knowing exactly what to do with it. His boots struck the airport tile with a rhythm that made people step aside without being asked. He didn't need to raise his voice. His uniform did the talking. By the time Officer Brennan noticed him, it was too late to prepare. David reached the circle of onlookers, his gaze never leaving his mother's face. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. But something in her posture broke. Her spine, once held so firmly upright, dipped just enough to reveal what she had fought to keep hidden. Shame. Not for herself, but for the fact that he had to see her like this. And that was enough. David turned to Brennan. "Take the cuffs off." The officer blinked, still catching up. "Sir, this doesn't concern you. She's my mother." Those 3 words landed like a gavel. Murmurs rippled. The young woman still filming moved in for a closer shot. The second officer stepped back instinctively, glancing between the 2 men. David's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "I said, take the cuffs off, now." Brennan squared his shoulders, trying to reassert control. She was acting suspicious, loitering near the terminal, refused to comply. "She was waiting for me." David stepped closer, the gap between them now less than a breath. He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a badge. Military police, federal authority. "You arrested a retired schoolteacher, a mother, for standing still with a bouquet of flowers." Brennan hesitated. His eyes flicked to the badge, then to the camera phone surrounding them, then back to David's eyes, calm, unreadable, deadly certain. "She resisted questioning," Brennan muttered. "No," David said. "She asked why she was being questioned." A beat passed. The second officer moved first, reaching toward the cuffs. Brennan stepped aside, his hands visibly shaking now. The metallic click that followed wasn't nearly as loud as when they were locked. But this time, it felt like thunder, the kind of sound that silences rooms. David caught his mother's wrists gently as they were freed. She winced, not from pain, but from the cold steel having left its imprint. He didn't speak. He just helped her fix the collar of her coat, picked up the envelope from the floor, and handed it back to her, creased but still intact. Brennan tried again. "You can file a complaint through the department." David looked him in the eye one final time. "You'll be hearing from more than just the department." He placed a protective arm around his mother's shoulder and turned. The crowd parted without a word. Every phone still recording. Every person watching justice walk, not shout, through the airport terminal. And Brennan, he stood frozen, not in fear, in realization. Because everything he thought made him powerful just got swallowed by something stronger. Honor. The video spread like wildfire. Before David and his mother even reached the parking lot, the first clip had hit social media. 38 seconds long. No music, no edits, just raw footage. A soldier approaching, a mother in cuffs, an officer fumbling to explain. The voiceover from the bystander filming was soft but damning. He arrested her for standing still, and she was just waiting for her son, who turned out to be military police. Within an hour, it was on every platform. By nightfall, it was news. Mother arrested. While waiting at airport, her son arrives in uniform and demands her release. Airport officer suspended after viral incident with military family. Soldier returns home to find his mother in handcuffs. The comments flooded in. Veterans, parents, activists, ordinary travelers who had seen versions of this before, but never with this ending. One user wrote, "She didn't just wait with dignity, she endured it, and he turned it into a lesson for all of us." Another said, "That officer's badge might be heavy, but it's nothing compared to the silence she carried." But the real impact wasn't online. It was inside Brennan's precinct. By morning, he was pulled into a closed-door meeting. Internal Affairs. His supervisor. A printed stack of policy violations on the desk before him. They didn't ask what happened. They asked why he thought it wouldn't matter. He had no answer. Meanwhile, David and his mother, now identified as Evelyn Carter, were invited to speak to the media. They declined. "We're not interested in cameras," David told a reporter at the hotel lobby. "We just wanted to come home." But someone leaked his rank. Staff Sergeant, U.S. Army Military Police, with 3 deployments and a commendation for field restraint under fire. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The man trained to de-escalate global conflicts had to intervene at his hometown airport. Back at the terminal, passengers still whispered about the moment. Gate agents nodded solemnly when they saw her photo. The bench where she'd stood, quiet, still unseen, was no longer just a seat. It became a symbol. Someone taped a note to it the next day. "Reserved for mothers who raise warriors." And Brennan? He returned home that night to find protesters outside his building. Silent, peaceful, holding signs that said, "Waiting isn't a crime." Dignity doesn't need clearance. This time, someone filmed it. But no sign hit harder than the one placed right beneath his window. "You asked for ID. She raised a soldier." When Evelyn stepped back through the terminal doors 2 days later, the floor didn't feel like tile anymore. It felt like memory. She had hesitated that morning, asked David if it was necessary. "We already walked away," she said. "Let it rest." But her son had looked at her the same way she used to look at him when he scraped his knee as a boy, and insisted it didn't hurt. He didn't push. He just said, "Sometimes people don't need permission to be reminded of what's right. They need presence." So she came. Not with a crowd, not with reporters, just herself. And the same grace she had stood with before everything fell apart. But this time, people noticed. It began at security. A TSA officer, eyes wide, stepped forward to open a lane that wasn't even designated for her flight. "Welcome back," she whispered. Evelyn smiled politely, unsure how to respond. By the time she reached Gate C-23, it was no longer quiet. People clapped, not a roar, but something warm, respectful. A few even stood. One elderly woman reached out and touched her arm gently. "You taught us something the other day," she said. Evelyn nodded. Her voice caught in her throat. She hadn't come for this. She didn't wear her pain like a story to retell. She came to sit on the same bench, lay the same flowers in her lap, and reclaim the space that once tried to erase her. Someone had printed the viral photo and framed it. A still of David standing beside her, one hand resting gently on her cuffed wrist, the other holding his badge. A note was attached. "This is what protection really looks like." She sat down slowly, the flowers resting across her lap again, this time fresh, vibrant. Around her, no one spoke loudly. No one questioned why she was there. The silence wasn't heavy now. It was honorable. And Officer Brennan? He had been placed on unpaid leave pending a full investigation. Public pressure was mounting. A petition calling for his termination had surpassed 200,000 signatures. His silence since the arrest only made things worse, but Evelyn never mentioned his name, not once, because the story was never really about him. It was about how the world had finally paused long enough to see someone like her, not a headline, not a hashtag, a mother, waiting. And this time, when she rose from that bench, the floor felt steady. The past 2 days hadn't broken her. They had revealed her to others, and maybe a little to herself, because dignity, when reclaimed, doesn't need a microphone. It just needs to be seen. The world didn't move on. Not this time. What began as a single video captured on a phone had grown into a national conversation. News anchors dissected the footage frame by frame. Commentators debated police protocol in non-criminal spaces. Civil rights attorneys offered statements. Airline CEOs issued apologies for creating an environment where this could happen. And through it all, Evelyn Carter remained silent. She didn't chase interviews. She didn't post statements. She declined every network's offer to share her side, because her side had already been shared. It was in her stillness, her restraint, her refusal to become what they expected. Instead, she spent her days exactly as she had before, cooking, tending to the flowers in her modest backyard, checking in on neighbors. She didn't want to be a symbol, but symbols aren't chosen. They emerge. Meanwhile, Officer Brennan was forced to face what he had always avoided: consequences. Internal Affairs released their findings. Racial profiling, excessive force without reasonable suspicion, failure to de-escalate. His record, once clean on paper, was now lined with annotations. Training footage was reviewed. His name, once known only to airport staff, was now featured in national op-eds. Not as a man, as a mirror. 2 other complaints from years prior resurfaced, both previously dismissed, both re-examined in light of Evelyn's case. This time, they were taken seriously. Airports across the country responded. One by one, they implemented revised training on bias response. Some partnered with community-led programs for officer retraining. One airport renamed their security ethics seminar after the case. The Evelyn Principle. David was offered a promotion. He declined. He told them, "You don't fix broken systems with medals. You fix them with accountability." The clip was archived in the Smithsonian's Civil Rights Media Collection, not because it was loud or violent, but because it wasn't. And still, it changed everything. 1 week later, a letter arrived at Evelyn's home. Handwritten, no return address. Just 2 lines inside. "I failed you. I see that now. I'm sorry." Signed, D. Brennan. She didn't frame it. She didn't tear it up. She tucked it in the same drawer where she kept old birthday cards and her late husband's final note. Because forgiveness, like power, doesn't always need an audience. The airport sent her a formal apology, along with a bouquet. She donated the flowers to the hospice center near her home. And when a reporter caught her outside the grocery store and asked, "What would you say to people who still think that officer was just doing his job?" She looked him in the eye and said, "If doing your job means forgetting someone's humanity, then maybe it's not a job worth doing." The airport was quieter this time. No cameras, no applause, just the steady hum of everyday life. Luggage wheels over tile, boarding calls over intercoms, strangers passing by without looking twice. Evelyn walked through it not as a headline, not as a symbol, but simply as herself. A woman who had survived something most wouldn't even believe, if not for the footage. She paused briefly at gate C-23. The bench was empty now, polished, ordinary again. But she didn't sit this time. She just looked at it, then smiled faintly. Not because it brought joy, but because it didn't bring pain anymore. she had taken it back. Her son stood a few paces behind her, arms folded, civilian clothes now, his badge tucked away. But he didn't need it. Everyone who mattered already knew what kind of man he was. The kind of man who didn't raise his voice, but protected people with it. The kind who knew when to fight and when to stand beside someone who didn't need to. As they walked toward the exit, a security officer nodded at them. This time, it was a nod of respect, not protocol. Outside, the sun filtered through the glass canopy. People rushed in all directions, families, business travelers, airport workers just beginning their shift. But somewhere in all that movement, Evelyn had created stillness. Not the stillness that draws suspicion, the kind that commands reverence. She didn't change the world by shouting. She changed it by not backing down. And though she never asked for it, the world had watched and listened. Because sometimes power isn't in the badge. It's in the quiet woman who never raised her voice, even as the world tried to silence her. Now ask yourself, have you ever seen someone treated like less just because of how they looked, or stood by while someone with power forgot what it meant to earn respect? If this story moved you, if it made you stop and think, don't let it end here. Tap that like button. Drop your city or your story in the comments, because Evelyn could be someone you know. And if you believe stories like this matter, subscribe. Because here, we don't just tell stories. We remind the world that dignity isn't something you give. It's something you recognize. And silence, sometimes it's not weakness. It's warning.